Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's EPIP and Exponent Philanthropy webinar, Facilitation Tools of the Trade. We're sorry we had a few technical difficulties to get started. Comes with the territory. We always roll with those, so we're really glad that you were able to join us. Today is December 3rd, 2014. It's our 17th EPIP webinar of the year, and I'm your host for this afternoon's festivities, Michael Barham. We're very happy to be joined by Janice Simsohn Shaw. She's the Senior Program Director at Exponent Philanthropy. As you can see, we're doing a little something different today, not only sharing our screens, but also sharing our webcam. So we're hoping to have a little fun with that. I hope you all are excited for the program today. I think we'll certainly learn a lot, and I hope you all enjoyed Giving Tuesday yesterday. I know we did, and had a really fun party with EPIP folks in New York City. So we're going to get started shortly. Before we do, I'd like to tell you all a little bit about who we are and what we do here at EPIP. We're a national network of foundation professionals and social entrepreneurs who strive for excellence in the practice of philanthropy. We're also an inclusive group of highly skilled and effective change makers committed to working together to build a just, equitable, and sustainable society. On top of that, we really try and provide a platform for our community to connect with others, learn and practice leadership skills, and use their voice to share emerging thoughts and ideas in the social sector. We're hoping to do a little bit of everything on this webinar today, so we're really glad that you joined us. And for those of you who aren't yet members of EPIP, it's a great time to join. We have plenty of webinars on the docket for 2015, plenty of local events, and our national conference is actually just set. So speaking of, make sure to save the date, May 13th through 15th. The EPIP conference has actually just recently been set, so this is our first major announcement. We're really excited about it. It's taking place in New Orleans, Louisiana. More info to come on that, but if you are interested in joining a committee, in a program committee, or the host committee, please email us your resume. We can learn a little bit more about you and get you on one of those committees. We're going to be doing a lot of planning over the next few months. You can reach us at admin, ADMIN, at epip.org if you're interested. Also, a really exciting webinar coming up 2 weeks from today, Wednesday, December 17th. Supersized imbalance post-2014 election, what foundations should know. We'll be joined by the National Committee for Responsive Philanthropy and National Institute for Money and State Politics. We're going to be joined by, on top of that, a few experts in elections, policy, and politics. So we'll be learning a lot on that webinar about how to kind of move forward. And for those of you not familiar with MC Mall, Member Connect is our online member directory. Measuring a Leader is our 7-domain skill set vital to leadership in the social sector. We're focusing on a different competency every month. December's domain is leadership and management, so what better way to hone those leadership and management skills than to learn a little bit more about how to become an expert facilitator. And as usual, if you want to learn more about EPIP events, local, national, webinars like this, visit epip.org/events. You can find everything there. Today's speaker is Janice Simsohn Shaw, and I see actually we lost, for some reason we lost a housekeeping slide, folks, so I'm going to go through on memory with that, but you'll all be kept on mute for the majority of this program, and you'll be kept on mute for the majority of the program, but we will encourage you to use your question box if you have questions throughout the program. We're also going to hopefully administer a few polls, and we'd love to hear polls with open-ended responses, and we'd love to hear feedback from you on the question box as well. We are also recording this webinar. You'll be able to access that on our website within about a week or so, as well as some additional resources and the slideshow itself. So I think I got everything there. Generally, you don't lose a slide, but we happen to today, so rolling with the punches as usual. And today's speaker is Janice Simsohn Shaw. She's the Senior Program Director at Exponent Philanthropy. We're really excited to have her. Janice actually hosted a session for us at the EPIP, the Joint Affinity Groups Unity Summit back in June in DC, and it was a fantastic session. We had some great feedback, and folks loved it so much we thought we could bring it to our national network and partner with the folks at Exponent and Janice on a webinar. So we're really just so grateful to have them join us again for the second time, and looking forward to sharing this with you all and learning something ourselves today. So without further ado, I am going to toss it over to Janice and get started with her portion of the presentation. Thanks again, folks, and we're gonna enjoy this one.
Hi, folks. This is Janice. I'm going to go ahead and share my webcam. Here I am, and I'll bring up my PowerPoint slides. So thanks so much, Michael. It's such a pleasure and such a privilege to be on today's webinar to talk about one of my very favorite subjects. If one of the organizers can just tell us in the chat box if you are seeing both my face and my screen successfully, that would be great to know. I'm getting a thumbs up. I realize my colleague sitting to my right can actually tell me that. Thank you, Nikki. So again, my name is Janice Simsohn Shaw, and I've spent the last decade working with hundreds of grant makers here at Exponent Philanthropy, formerly the Association of Small Foundations. One thing I want to say off the bat, I have a tendency, for those of you who know me, you know this, to be a fast talker. So please, if I'm being too speedy and you can't understand me, shoot us a note using the GoToWebinar little chat box and let us know, and I promise to slow down. So I appreciate your help with that. Thank you. So a little bit about Exponent Philanthropy for those of you who are not familiar with us, and we really appreciate the opportunity to partner with EPIP. We're working towards pretty similar goals in the field, I think. We are the largest membership association in the philanthropy sector. We have about 2,300 organizational members in all 50 states. We're open to all philanthropists who work with few or no staff. And while our core is foundations, our members really use a variety of other giving vehicles as well, using donor-advised funds, just checkbook writing, individual giving, trusts, and giving circles. And we find that diversity really enriches our membership. And our mission is simply put to empower philanthropists to leverage their resources and to amplify their impact. So if you're interested in learning more about who we are, what we're up to, feel free to shoot me a note, janice@exponentphilanthropy.org, after this call. So my role here at Exponent Philanthropy, as I said, I've been here about a decade, and I run our Next Gen Fellows program, which is a 6-month fellowship for young people in philanthropy, as well as something called the Master Juggler Executive Institute, which is a year-long learning and training program for executive directors in the field. So if you're interested in those programs, let me know. Would love to talk with you about them. But more importantly, I think more relevant for today's call, or webinar, pardon me, is that I do a whole lot of training and facilitation, and I love it. So a huge thanks to my friend Jen Bokoff and her team at the Foundation Center at GrantCraft. I've taught this workshop for years at Exponent Philanthropy, variations on it, and with EPIP and regional associations and various groups around the country. And most recently, we did this as a packed session at our own Exponent Philanthropy National Conference. And at that session, Jen Bokoff partnered with me. She's a phenomenal facilitator herself. And her team kindly crafted much of this PowerPoint. They did all the fun stuff. So I wanted to give them credit and say thank you for letting me use it here as well. Feel free to give them a shout out. Their Twitter handles and ours are there. Her team is much hipper than I am, I will tell you. I barely understand all the pop culture references you'll see, but the images do help get the key points across. So a big thank you to Jen and her team. So why facilitation? Why facilitation? To share a little bit about the history of why we started doing workshops on facilitation in the philanthropy space. A few years ago, I was helping one of our members, who was at the time a fairly new executive director of a sizable family foundation in New York City. She was preparing for a board meeting, and she was thoughtfully trying to find the best ways to get her board engaged while also trying to be the leader that they had hired her to be. And it's a delicate balance, as we all know. She knew I'd done a lot of facilitation work, and she said, you know, Janice, we need training around facilitation in philanthropy. And thus, this was born. So facilitation, the art and the science of leading productive processes and meetings, It provides the opportunity to make our work more effective, more efficient. It's also, and I want to acknowledge this, I think it is difficult to do well in some ways. So I appreciate you all being here to learn together today. And in philanthropy, I think there's an extra layer, that there are so many power dynamics that add complexity, that add richness to. So as a great teacher from the Interaction Institute for Social Change, where I've done training, and I know others on this call have, said, every meeting is an opportunity for culture change. And I love that, because I think culture change is a big, hard idea, and it breaks it down into the fact that by shifting the way we hold meetings, we can shift culture. It's a very exciting prospect. So whether you're running a staff meeting, a board meeting, whether you're a part of a convening with fellow grant makers, or holding a grantee convening, and whether you're at the head of the table or you sit at the table, and we'll talk more about that later, wherever you sit around that table, I believe that skillful facilitation can be one of the keys to productive, engaging, and frankly, more pleasurable gatherings. It's an opportunity for folks to take ownership, to bring multiple voices to the table, and to do your work better. So by the end of our call today, our webinar, I hope you'll have a clearer sense of what good facilitation can do for your organization and some simple tips and frameworks for facilitating skillfully from wherever you sit in the room. So while it's a little bit trickier to do this via webinar than if we were all in an actual room together, I do really hope to tap into the collective wisdom of the room. I'm not sure if Michael mentioned, but we're blown away by the number of people who registered for today's session. We've maxed out GoToWebinar with nearly 100 people on today, which is amazing. So there's a tremendous amount of knowledge here. So I want to encourage you to use, you have a little question box in your GoToWebinar screen. And in that question box, please put questions in throughout. We'll address questions towards the end, but we'd love to have them coming in throughout. But secondly, if you have additional ideas to contribute to the conversation, I welcome and encourage you to share them there, and I will try to catch them and share them out with the group. Collectively, we have a heck of a lot more knowledge than any one of us alone. So thank you for sharing your voice here. So our agenda, what are we going to do today? I'll try to practice what I preach as much as I can, so sharing a good agenda. So in a moment, we'll poll the room, so to speak, and hear a little bit from you all about what kinds of meetings you run, what makes them good. I'll share some of my top tips for strong meeting facilitation. Then I'll offer up a handful of select resources and tools to apply it to your work. And then time permitting, at the end, we'll take some questions. So I hope that plan works well for everyone. So my first question for you is this. We're going to test our technology. What kind of meetings do you facilitate or participate in? Writ large, what kinds of meetings do you facilitate or participate in? So use that little question box and chime in, and I'll share what I hear from y'all. Take a moment. I see staff meetings. What else? Board meetings. Meetings that are made up of all volunteers, groups that you volunteer with. Anyone else? You people are being mighty shy. Mighty shy. Maybe I'm not seeing them in the right box. I'm just going to check here. Ah, here we go. I apologize, folks. I wasn't seeing the right box. Let me make this bigger if I can. Strategy sessions, planning meetings, retreats, trainings, internal conferences, external conferences, lots and lots of kinds of meetings. Let's see what else has come in here. Check-ins with staff, workshops, committee meetings, planning meetings, donor services, strategic planning, grantee convenings, community meetings, grant review and selection meetings, advisory committees. I love this. Brainstorming, youth grant making, grantee convenings, conference calls, remote things, right? And the list goes on and on and on. So thank you all for sharing these. We have so many types of meetings in our space with so many different power dynamics at play. And for the purposes of our conversation today, I'm going to define a meeting as any time two or more people come together to do, share, or learn anything. I've even been known to have meetings with agendas with my husband and my 3-year-old and my 6-year-old. So there's all types. So my next question for you, interesting. All right, here we go, is what does a good meeting, a really well-facilitated meeting, look like, feel like, and do? So take a moment to answer that one. So a good meeting. Thank you guys. Oh, this is an awesome group. Doing interaction remote is hard, and I so appreciate y'all chiming in. I'm just going to read some of these. They're terrific. So a great meeting engages participants. It stays on topic. It's not too long. I appreciate that. It engages folks. That's coming up left and right. It's interactive. It produces actionable items. We come out knowing what the next steps are. There's good time management. There's good use of visuals. It has clear goals. We don't let one person go on too long. It's energizing. It's inspiring. You feel a sense of accomplishment. What does it look like? It looks focused. It takes into account all the voices in the room. It allows for participation by many and often has some decisions or at least some clear actions at the end. And we'll talk about not all meetings are decision-making meetings, right? You know where you're going and you work to get there together. It has a clear agenda. It's well signposted, open, and honest. It is productive and results in action items, and I love this, assigned to individuals, not the arbitrary actions shall happen, but assigned to individuals. Let me see if there's anything else that hasn't been mentioned yet. I'll just share a few more. Thank you all for your wonderful contributions. I'm sorry I can't read each and every one. It builds community. It brings clarity. It has a facilitator and a note taker in addition to participants, so there's different roles. It has cookies. I think we'll end with that one because that's so terrific. We will touch on all of those topics, and I so appreciate you all sharing. Again, you come up with much more than I could on my own. And really what I hope is that we'll come up with some ideas over the course of this webinar that will help you make more of your meetings feel, look like, and accomplish those things. So thank you again for sharing. So let's dive in. One of you actually shared, though I didn't read out loud, icebreakers. So I couldn't figure out a way to do an icebreaker over a webinar. I did want to highlight them as a helpful way to start a meeting. And what I define as an icebreaker is an opener that helps people connect as human beings. And really, it needn't be an opener. At any point during a meeting, something that's more about connecting as human beings than about the business at hand. Because this is, after all, a human business, right? Which is what makes facilitation tricky. It's what makes it meaningful. And icebreakers can be fun or serious. I think sometimes we think about goofy games, and it needn't be goofy games. So some really simple examples of check-ins, torn from the headlines that I know real organizations that use. A simple check-in. If you meet quarterly, some highlight from your past quarter. My colleague Nikki, who's sitting here to my right in the office, asked a question about gratitude at our staff meeting this morning, which was a lovely opener. Using the practice of civic reflection, which is that of using a short piece of literature as a jumping off point to talk about deeper questions, or indeed something silly. I'll share resources at the end about different icebreakers, but I do believe it can really help set a tone, that we recognize that the people in this room are humans, and it helps connect people as human beings before you move forward to do whatever your business is at hand. Next tip, plan, 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 plan. So I really believe that much of good facilitation is really about good planning. This is my #1 tip. Plan, plan, and then plan some more. My rule of thumb is I spend at least 2 times, twice as long preparing for something as I do executing it. So for example, today I've facilitated workshops around the country on facilitation. I facilitate all the time. I love it. You still better believe I spent far more than 2 hours preparing for our 1-hour webinar. These things take time to prepare thoughtfully. So I always believe in starting with desired outcomes. Desired outcomes, you all know, fancy talk for by the end of this meeting, what will we have accomplished, right? If everything goes well, what will we have accomplished? Clarity about X, a decision about Y, increased knowledge about Z. And then you begin designing your meeting with that end game, with where you want to get to front in your mind. Then once you have a sense of what you want to accomplish, who needs to be in that room? So we want to make sure that the right stakeholders are in the room and engage them as is appropriate in advance of the meeting. So one example about how this can really be a game changer, I know one executive director who was often blindsided at her board meetings, and she actually has a highly functional board who enjoys each other. It's not a tricky group, but they were always blindsided. Someone always came into a board meeting with a surprise. It threw off their agenda, and it was tricky. And so she started speaking to each of her board members one-on-one in the weeks prior to each of their board meetings, and it was a game changer. There were no surprises. There were no landmines. Everyone was prepared equally, right? Everyone had done the work because she made sure of it, and everyone felt heard. And that ended up resulting in freed up time. After her first board meeting like this, she's like, whoa, we had extra time. That's never happened before. But it freed up time so they could talk about bigger strategic questions, as it's a foundation that's in the process of growing significantly. It also freed up time to bring in more grantees. They do armchair site visits. They bring grantees to their board meetings. So it freed up more time for the pleasurable work and the meaningful work and the high-level work. So who's right for a given meeting, right? Think about who the right people are that need to either have the information, share the information, be part of the decision. And if not everyone in a given meeting really needs to be there, honor that reality. See what you can break out into a smaller meeting just to really honor people's time. And important here too, I'll just say before moving to the next slide, is to then really meaningful engage those people in advance. Share agendas. Share pre-work, let them know who else will be at the meeting and so forth, doing as much as you can with them in advance. So now, you've gotten clear on what it is you want to accomplish. You have a sense of who needs to be in the room. Now is the time we turn to agenda planning. So a couple of thoughts from me on good agendas. The first thing I'd say is be realistic about time. How many of us have been in a meeting that's got way too much on the agenda, right? It makes us feel disrespected. It's not a good use of your time. You know you're not going to accomplish all those things. So I think we set ourselves up and others up for success when we really plan accordingly to the amount of time we have. And I know that sometimes time is set before the agenda is. You know you have a half-day board meeting each quarter. It is what it is. So then plan appropriately as such. It will leave people feeling more satisfied, more accomplished, and more respected when leaving the meeting. So in a board meeting, consider using a consent agenda as one way to save some time. If you're not familiar with a consent agenda, it's one agenda item that packs in a number of non-controversial items. So it might be board minutes, approving various things that you know there's not going to be conversation around into one fell swoop, and they can be approved if you use Robert's Rules of Order in one agenda item. Also, when planning an agenda, mix it up. I believe in mixing things up to appeal to different learning styles, to keep people awake, and most importantly, to find ways to engage everyone. So we all know not everyone is a speak up in a big meeting kind of person, but everyone has something valuable to contribute. So I try to have a mix of individual reflection. I'll often have people do a little bit of journaling or brainstorming on their own, partnered or small group work. And the great thing about partnered work or small group work is that every voice gets heard, right? When you're working in a pair, you can't choose to be silent. You have to be engaged. And large group work, as well as some physical movement. I always try to get people moving around a little bit. I think it helps our brain juices work better. Highly scientific idea from my head here. But I do think it helps people stay alert and engaged. And of course, we plan into an agenda good breaks, movement time if we're moving from one place to another during a meeting, and just a little bit of breathing room. Generally, that works out well, better than a jam-packed agenda. So what type of meeting is it? There are all kinds of meetings: informational meetings, brainstorming meetings, input gathering meetings, and decision-making meetings. Meetings might take place over a 5-minute hallway conversation. Sometimes those are really great, right? Or they might be a multi-day strategic planning retreat. So I think it's really important to be really explicit first for yourself if you're the planner or if you're a participant to ask for clarity about what kind of meeting it is. I know there have been times I've been brought into meetings thinking I was part of a decision-making process, when really I was being informed of a decision that had already been made. And it didn't feel good, but I think it could have been easily averted by just being told, hey, we've made these decisions. We look forward to filling you in on our logic and what got us there and hearing your feedback, right? Just real clarity and transparency about what kind of meeting it is. That clarity serves everyone well. Another point on clarity, clarity of roles. So what roles will individuals play in your meeting? Facilitator, timekeeper, note taker, logistics manager. One of you raised this up in your comment, which I so appreciate. One person doesn't need to, and in most cases shouldn't, do it all. It's really hard to do it all, and it doesn't serve the group. For a long or complex meeting, I still encourage you to divvy up the roles. It invests the group more meaningfully, lightens the load from the facilitator, and allows more people to be engaged. So one point that my friend Jen Bokoff at Grantcraft made when we taught this together a few weeks ago, and I want to give a nod to her, I'd never thought about this and I think it's so wise, is to be really clear about who the positional leader in the room might be. So in a family foundation, perhaps that's the matriarch or the patriarch. In a staff, perhaps that's the executive director. In a board meeting, perhaps the board chair, right? So they're the positional leader of that group, but they might not be the facilitator of a given meeting. That person can explicitly, though, take the stance of affirming who is leading the meeting. So people really defer to them and give them that authority to lead the meetings. For instance, the board chair could simply say, I'd like to thank Sally for leading today's discussion. I'm really looking forward to participating. And I think that's a really strong moment of power sharing and of role clarification that serves everyone in the room well. One tricky balance that many of us must play when facilitating in our own organizations, which happens in all sorts of organizations, businesses, nonprofits, foundations, is that sometimes we internally are playing that role of facilitator for a given meeting or conversation, while at the same time we have skin in the game, meaning that is, it's our job to guide the conversation and keep it on track, while at the same time we have our unique perspective and want to voice it. And that's fine, and it can be done. But I think that sometimes just making very clear and stating explicitly, hey, I'm just going to step out of my facilitator role for a moment now and weigh in, because I actually have some information and opinions I'd really like to share on the subject matter. So with everyone's permission, I'm just going to kind of take my facilitator hat off for a moment and step into participant role. I think that that's just important to be really clear about, because it is hard to do that dance and a valuable practice. So visual aids. Warning, the sign is only a distraction. I was recently asked, is it standard operating procedure to use a PowerPoint? I actually prefer the old paper agenda, chart paper, and markers approach, or both. I find that keeping the tasks in front of people as they're defined helps with understanding. Is that too archaic? So I love this question, and my answer is that it depends. It depends on the group. It depends on the type of meeting, and it depends on the facilitator style. For me, easel pad and markers is my default. This is a big stretch for me to be doing this via webinar, can't see your faces, talking into the void. But there have been times like this, like when leading a 100-person convening, that having some simple PowerPoint slides helps keep people on track, helps keep the agenda clear, and it's been worth the stretch. So what matters most and what I try to think about with visuals is that it helps to serve and support and strengthen your agenda and the work at hand. Visuals for visuals' sake don't mean much. I get asked a lot about sort of fun uses of sticky notes, and there's lots of fun things you can do with sticky notes, but again, only if it serves the goal you're working towards. So logistics matter, and we put this slide in here because Jen Bokoff and I share a hatred of crunchy foods in a meeting. It's messy, it's loud, it's distracting. So meeting location, meeting timing, not starting something right at rush hour when it's hard to get somewhere, say downtown LA. Room temperature, having high protein snacks for brain power and water. Being attentive to accessibility issues of all sorts. I recently was leading a workshop at our national conference in a big ballroom, and I really don't care to use a microphone if I can avoid it. So I wasn't going to, and I was so grateful to a participant in the room who said, you know, I have some hearing loss, and I really can't hear you, so I'd be grateful if you use a microphone. And I was so glad that she said that rather than putting it on my evaluation an hour later, so otherwise she would have not been really able to get anything out of it. So all sorts of accessibility issues, physical and otherwise. Taking thoughtful breaks, all those little logistical details matter. and they really do help make for successful meetings. So other than the plan slide, this is my very, very favorite slide and topic, and that is that we can, oops, I skipped forward, pardon, preempt trouble. Preempt trouble. So what do I mean by this? I think that as we sit down to plan for or prepare to participate in an upcoming meeting, 9 times out of 10, we know what the likely trouble will be. We know in our gut. Perhaps it's that there are simply too many items on the agenda and too little time. Perhaps it's that a particular individual never does the pre-work and comes in and derails. Perhaps it's that we have a dominating personality in the group who doesn't really allow space for others to speak. Or perhaps it's that we have a group who loves each other and always needs that half an hour to gab before starting the meeting. So oftentimes I think we know in our heart of hearts what the challenges are going to be, and we choose to kind of ignore what our gut says. We go with our intellect, we say, I've planned a good agenda, it will be fine, but our gut knows. And I would say to listen to that gut, because whatever the trouble might be, you're probably right, and it's a whole lot easier and more successful to address it in advance than in the moment in the meeting. So a couple of thoughts around what works. And making wishes and sprinkling fairy dust, I have tried it and it does not, unfortunately. So what can you do in advance? Agenda too jammed? Consider what can come off of it. What can be addressed at a different time, perhaps with a subset of the group? What is the most crucial stuff to do when you have that group together, whether it be in person, a virtual meeting? What is most critical to do together? That's sort of my triage test of what should we take off and what should we keep. I was once doing a retreat for a giving circle, a women's giving circle here in the Washington, D.C. area. And we had a great agenda, and the night before the event, their executive director said, oh, please, Janice, oh, please, can't you jam this one thing in? It would be so great. And my gut said, no, we don't have time. But I liked her. I wanted to make her happy. I wanted to make the group happy. So I said, sure, we can make it work. And it didn't work. We jammed it in, and it was the only negative thing we got on our evaluations was it seemed like things were a little too packed in. And I should have listened to my group, but to my gut. I didn't serve the group well in that moment. So agenda too jammed, figure out what can come off. Dominating personality, it's a question we often get. What do you do with that person who's a dominator in the meeting? I find that more often than not, the dominator just wants to be heard. They just want to be heard. So sometimes spending time one-on-one with them in advance, and it might be a lot of time hearing them, can help them then rein in a little bit in the moment. Another tactic for dealing with the great dominators is giving them a job in the meeting, perhaps tasking them with facilitating a small section. I find that that can help create empathy and give them sort of a sense of importance and a role in the meeting. And if you have a group who needs to gab for 30 minutes before starting business, build in the time for them to gab. So again, I really believe that preempting trouble serves everyone better than trying to handle it on the fly. So here we have, and this was a question we got in advance too, is how to facilitate from any seat in the room. So when you're not the positional leader, or even necessarily facilitating that given meeting, what can you do? And I really do believe that even though there are very real power and role limitations at play in organizations, I think that you can, within reason, serve as a gentle and helpful facilitator from any seat in the room. So what can you do? You can ask either in advance or in the moment, hey, can we just pause for a moment to make sure we're all clear about our goals for this meeting? I'll sometimes play dumb and say, maybe I'm missing something. I just want to make sure I understand what we're here for so I can be sure to contribute as meaningfully as I can. I put it on myself, right? You might help keep time. You notice the time. You see you've got a ton left on the agenda. You can say, hey, I'm seeing that we only have 20 minutes left. What would be the best use of our time? Should we pause for a moment and make the most figure out the best use of our time for this remaining? I think that when spoken genuinely from a place of respect and a place of helpfulness, the facilitator, most likely, and the group almost certainly will really appreciate your support in terms of keeping things on track. And I think there is a certain amount of sensitivity needed there that I sometimes struggle with. I always joke that I take pride in meetings that I facilitate. When I'm sitting in a room with a meeting that someone else is facilitating that I'm finding frustrating, it's very easy for me to turn into a 14-year-old surly, I just roll my eyes and start doodling. But I'm trying really hard increasingly to be disciplined about that and to recognize that I can contribute to bettering the structure of that meeting even in that moment, and that as a participant, I hold that responsibility too. It's not just on the facilitator. That's not fair to them. So listening, it's one of many, many roles. I think listening is perhaps one of the most powerful and important roles a facilitator plays. But meanwhile, when you're facilitating, you're juggling so many different roles. You're keeping the meeting moving on track. You're focusing on the goals and agenda at hand and deviating thoughtfully if the situation really warrants it. You're echoing back concepts and asking for clarification. And I want to say a little bit more about that. I think echoing back can be an incredibly validating move. So somebody says, you know, I really am frustrated by this process. You say, so I'm hearing that you're really frustrated. As simple as that, it just can be validating to that person. Okay, someone gets it. And the second thing I want to underline is asking for clarification. As a facilitator, it's very easy to just nod and smile when someone says their piece and then point to the next person. But I think it's so important to listen for meaning. And if you cannot make sense of what someone has just said, ask for clarification. Chances are if you didn't understand, someone else or most people around the table didn't either. So you can just say, hey, I'm not sure I got that. Could you just restate that once for me? And I find that most times when someone restates their point, they get a whole lot clearer. So that's often enough. Or if you have someone who tends to go on and you're scared to ask them to speak again, sometimes we just say, hey, can you give me that in like as if it was a bumper sticker? Give me that as a quick slogan so I'm sure I understand it. So you can encourage people to be pithier. And I think that those two things, echoing back concepts and asking for clarification, are really important. So you're listening, but you're also observing. You're observing what's going on in the room with people's body language, right? You're noticing if you've got lots of arms closed up, if you've got people checking out. Also, I do believe that our smartphones, our gadgets, right, can be a really powerful clue when you're losing a group. Of course, people might be on their phones tweeting a little bit or doing a little bit here and there. You can tell in a room. I was watching at a conference session yesterday if people are just sitting, playing with their phones, checking Facebook, checking their email, doing a little work, or if they're tweeting. When people start just checking those things, you know you've lost them. So I find it actually a really helpful clue to know when people are paying attention and when they're not. You create the space for all voices to be heard. Sometimes just physically walking over to a quieter person and standing beside them or placing a hand gently on their shoulder can help shift that a little bit. And you help move groups towards decision making when needed. And there's all sorts of tips and tactics for decision making. I'll share a good resource about that at the end. And you ensure that there are clear action steps and responsible parties coming out of the meeting and that thank yous are said. Okay, so we've got questions coming in. I'm going to continue through sort of the key points, but we are doing fine on time, so we will have time for those questions. So, yeah? We have a few questions coming in. Okay, I'm going to take a look at the questions in a moment. I want to keep moving for the moment, and then we'll move to questions. I promise to save time for them. So one particular role I want to flag is that of naming what's going on. I think that sometimes as facilitators, we think we have to have all the answers, and we don't. We don't. The group shares that responsibility. For example, if a group seems stuck or if a conversation is veering off track, you don't have to magically know how to solve the problem. But I do hold myself responsible as a facilitator for stopping, pausing, and naming it, for saying, it seems like we're veering off our agenda here. Is this something we need to pause and pursue now? And if so, that's okay. Let's rejigger things. Or can we table this to another time and continue on our agenda? Or even just saying in a hard moment, just naming it as such, saying, wow, you know what, I just want to acknowledge this is a really tough moment, folks. This is tough. We're a little bit stuck. Just acknowledging it, I think, can be really powerful. And then finally, I think that asking for help is always fair game. Again, the facilitator isn't the end-all be-all. You're helping to drive a process forward, but you don't have to know all the answers. So you can ask for help. You can say, hey, I wonder if you all have thoughts on what might help us move forward most effectively. Anybody in the room have thoughts on that? And get input from the group. And it's totally fair game in a really tough moment or in a moment where just the energy seems diffused to call for a break, an unplanned break. Say, you know what, I think we'd all benefit from taking 10 minutes. Let's take 10 minutes. We'll come back together and regroup. These things are all fair game. And I think that it's a powerful stance and at the same time a very humble stance as a facilitator to honor what's going on in the room, to not being afraid to ask for help, and you're still maintaining that role as train conductor. So just 2 more slides, and then we will go to questions, my friends. Those are kind of my top tips. There are so many, and I tried to focus on things that I think are most salient in our space and that are more helpful to talk about necessarily than to read about. So a couple of resources and application ideas for you. As I mentioned earlier, I've been trained by a shop called the Interaction Institute for Social Change, which is based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I think they do tremendous work. They have tremendous publications. We have a member of our Next Gen Fellow cohort who carries their one of their guidebooks around in his briefcase. I kid you not. I told him they have a small, like, pocket version. He was astounded because he's been carrying around a 2-pound book for years. But their stuff, it's a very nice balance of very intellectual and very grounded and accessible. I really like their work. The second organization I listed here for those on the West Coast is called Community at Work. They're based in the Bay Area, if I'm not mistaken. I've not done training with them myself, although I hear great things from very, very trusted sources, and I would like to do training with them. The first resource listed is a book put out by Community at Work. The guy that heads up that shop is named Sam Kainer. So the Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision Making from Sam Kainer, I have on my desk right now. I use frequently. It's a really, really nice tool. So for folks who are interested in meaningful decision-making tools, there's some great stuff there. The second piece, a little tear sheet from Exponent Philanthropy. We have a whole series of short white papers called tear sheets. And we have one on facilitation, and we will share that. Michael will upload that with all of the resources after the webinar within the next week. Jen Bokoff was kind enough to write on request a blog post about icebreakers after we did some fun ones at our recent conference, so we'll share the link to that blog post. And then finally, the other resource I wanted to share here is the project on civic reflection. Although when I went and looked at their website after I made the PowerPoint, they are now the Center on Civic Reflection. They have a tremendous resource library of short readings. You can put in all sorts of topics: generosity, complexity, decision-making, and they'll bring up 10 readings on the subject with guiding questions. They're a really powerful tool for starting conversations from a different place. They're a nice organization. They also do some great trainings themselves. And the final tool that I'll share in the next screen is I have a very simple meeting planning and design worksheet. And here's a little screenshot of the first part of it. I designed this years ago. It's not rocket science. We will share it with you afterwards, but it starts about what's the purpose, what are we coming together around, date and the time, who we think the key stakeholders are, what the decision-making model is, and what you can't see below there, and then it gets to the details. Desired outcomes, what do we want to accomplish? 3 or 4 or 5 things at the very, very most. And then given that, are those the right stakeholders? Do we need to revisit this? It's a very simple template. I'm sharing it with you all as a Word doc, so you could type into it if you want to. And I encourage you to come up with some format, whether that or something else that helps you to plan thoughtfully. So we are now going to turn to some questions. Give me a moment to review your questions, and I'll share some out with the group. See if Nikki shows me again how to make this thing big. Thank you, Nikki. All right. Okay. She's flagging a couple questions for me. I'm just getting down to them, folks. Bear with me. Okay. I have a nice icebreaker suggested. A great and funny icebreaker is to ask everyone to tell the first concert they ever went to. That's fun. It could be a good cross-generational conversation. So, okay. Let me find here. Pardon me, folks. So we have a question is, and I think it's a great question, what are the actual skills and techniques of facilitation within a meeting? That a lot of this sounds like effective meeting planning. So I'd say yes and yes. A lot of this is effective meeting planning, and I believe that that is most of what skilled facilitation is. But what are the actual skills and techniques within a meeting? I would go back to the roles and responsibilities slide that I mentioned. So I think as a facilitator, you're number one, the train conductor, right? You're keeping things moving on track according to that agenda that you've thoughtfully planned. But at the same time as you're the train conductor, you're the key listening officer for what's said. You're the key clarification officer. You're saying to someone, I need a little bit more clarification on that. I didn't understand that. You're helping to move a group towards decision-making if it is a decision-making meeting. right? You're encouraging all the voices to be heard in gentle ways. And I've learned that there are some people who are not comfortable speaking in a large room. So again, that's why I try to do some things in pairs and small groups to get all the voices engaged as much as possible. You're managing the troublemakers in the room, whether that be the dominator or the snoozer or the interrupter. You're willing to kind of be the bad guy to keep things on track. And you're moving a group as a meeting closes towards clarity, if it's a decision-making meeting, towards decision-making, and in most any sort of meeting towards next steps. So what is coming away from this meeting? Whose responsibility are the different pieces, and so forth. So I hope that that is helpful, and if others have thoughts to chime in, I encourage you to do so. Let's see. How can a facilitator best diffuse tension or disagreement? It's a great question and a very real issue. I would put that squarely in the camp of, if possible, preempt trouble. Sometimes in facilitation training, we talk about, and this is straight from the Interaction Institute, I like their approach a lot, preventions and interventions, right? So what are the things you can do in advance? And then what are the things that you do in the moment? So in advance, if you know there are two parties that always butt heads, right? Talk with them in advance. Talk with each individual. See what it is that's really going on. And I think I would say more important than talk to the individual, listen to the individual, right? See if you can get to what's underlying what's going on for them, and maybe you can help them move past it. Listen with almost a coaching mentality, and those of you who have been involved in coaching would know what I mean by this, but that asking for clarification, asking them for 3 possible solutions. So if they finally come down to, well, I just really can't stand Bill. He always cuts me off and makes me feel belittled, right? Rather than saying, well, here are 5 different ways we could address that. Here's what I think, and getting really nervous that you have to fix the problem. I would ask them to help you be the problem solver, right? To say to them, okay, I hear that, and I'm really sorry that's been such a frustrating experience for you. I hear that. What are 3 different ways you can imagine that you or we together could help address that and get their help with that, right? If it's appropriate, perhaps bringing those people together separate from your big meeting to see if you can bash out these things, or to just get them on the same page. And then the final thing I'd say about diffusing tension or disagreement is that sometimes we get mired down in our interpersonal dynamics, particularly in a family foundation when there's family stuff, but even not in a family foundation, even in a staff meeting with professionals who work together. I think in philanthropy, sometimes we work together for a long time and it becomes a little bit like family. So I think that sometimes also one way to help diffuse tension or disagreement is to help people rise above the personal stuff and remind them of the task at hand, a reminder of what's going on the agenda, a reminder of ground rules, and so forth. I'll just say one other thing about ground rules, because a question came in about that as well. Some organizations use ground rules, some don't. Sometimes calling them working agreements can make people a little less fearful that we're going to get together and sing Kumbaya for the afternoon. Working agreements. I think that if people don't respect them, my first question would be, who crafted the ground rules? Were they part of that conversation? I would ask, is it time to revisit those ground rules, right? And to talk about what those mean in practice. Those would be sort of my first tips on that. See if there are a couple other ones that we can address in the couple minutes we have remaining. Tips for engaging during a remote session. I can share one other link with Michael, which is a really nice white paper on remote facilitation and meetings from the Interaction Institute. I'd say most of the premises are the same. The couple tips that are unique are, one, figure out your technology. I have a friend who does a bunch of learning circles, all remote, with women from all over the country. She leads these. She has one-on-ones with each individual before they launch their group, their cohort, to make sure each individual knows how to use their technology. And it's a ton of front-end time, but so it's there so that they can be as smooth as possible all together. So practice the technology. Make sure you've got it as well as you can. And there's still snafus. We had one at the beginning here, because I'm not very technological, but practice as much as you can. The second tip for remote sessions is if you have most of a group in one room. We have that with our staff team here, and 1 or 2 people remote. Oftentimes having the remote people facilitate can just automatically make everyone more sensitive to their needs. If everyone is remote, I'd say then you're all on equal footing. It's a little bit different. I see it's hard when people are silent or talk over each other on calls. I think if you can have people muted except when they're speaking, and sometimes using a webinar or a Google Hangout in addition to or in lieu of phones so that you can see faces and you see nuances can help that a little bit. All right, we'll look at a little bit, see if there's any other questions here that are critical. Someone asked, how might a trained facilitator best approach participating in a meeting when they're not the designated leader? I hope we touched on that enough. All right, I think we've hit on all the major questions. If you have another burning question, we have just another couple of minutes, so go ahead and throw something in there. I'll give you a moment. All right, folks. Well, I am then going to say thank you so much. I appreciate EPIP for inviting us to do this webinar together, and I really appreciate all of you taking the time to be here. I'm happy to be a resource to you. I really do love puzzling through facilitation challenges, so feel free to call upon me as a resource. We'll share those links and documents afterwards, and I will hand the baton back to Michael. Michael, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Janice. That was awesome, and we just want to reiterate our gratitude to you and the Exponent team. Really, really appreciated everything you had to share there, and I think folks really learned a lot. I certainly did, and one of the exciting things about helping to kind of plan the EPIP webinar program is that I get to kind of try and bring in some programs and some sessions that I could use myself, and this was certainly one that I was really excited to learn more about. So thank you so much, and I want to thank everyone who joined us today. And just a couple of quick reminders. One is please complete the post-webinar survey. We always want to learn and make sure we're improving our webinars. And as we mentioned earlier, and as Janice mentioned, all of these resources and the webinar recording and the slides will be made available on our website within about a week or so. So check back there for that, and we hope to see you in a few weeks. And thanks again, folks, and thanks again to Janice and Exponent. Enjoy the day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everybody.